God's chosen aunts. You were never fully human. That's why you never fit in. Have you ever wondered why you felt like a stranger in your own life? Why silence speaks louder than crowds? Why your eyes carry weight, even when your mouth says nothing? It's because you are not 100% human. You never were. There is something ancient in your bones, the fire behind your eyes, a knowing that has no name, but heaven remembers it. You weren't born to blend in. You were sent to stand apart. You've been walking through life like an echo of something eternal, because your soul didn't come from here, it came from Him. And now the veil is lifting, because today, if you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven with your name on it. The restlessness was the signal. A quiet morning in a small southern town. Spring fog drapes over empty sidewalks. Inside a weathered house framed by creaking wood and wild roses, Naomi sits at her kitchen table, Bible open, hands trembling. There's a kind of weariness that doesn't come from work, but from being. Naomi had always felt it, since childhood, a restlessness that lived in her chest like a caged bird. She'd smile in conversation but feel unseen. She'd try to settle, to belong, to be normal. But something always pulled her to the edge of every room, as if heaven had planted a magnet in her bones, and the world kept trying to pull it the wrong way. She never spoke about it out loud, because how do you tell someone, I don't think I'm from here? Last night, it happened again. 3:17 a.m., eyes wide open, no sound, no dream, just pressure in the air, a whisper behind the veil of silence. She rose from bed and walked barefoot to the window. Something outside was glowing, not light, but something deeper, familiar, holy. Now, with morning light spilling across her table, Naomi flips open her old childhood journal. There, in fading ink, a drawing she made at age 7, is a woman standing on a hill, wings on her back, fire in her eyes. Below it, written in crooked letters, I come from the sky, but they forgot. Her hands shake. She closes her eyes and whispers, God, what am I? And in the stillness, something inside her finally answers. You are not just flesh, you are fire, you are spirit wrapped in skin. You were sent, not born. Her heart beats louder now, not in fear, but recognition, because what she's always called restlessness, it was never anxiety. It was the signal, the divine code awakening, part 1, the ancient code in your blood. Naomi's kitchen, early morning, a storm quietly rolls in. Characters, Naomi, her dog Gideon, flashbacks of young Naomi, age 7, a worn Bible, and her childhood journal. The rain started softly, a tap against the window pane, like the rhythm of a memory trying to resurface. Naomi sat at the kitchen table with her grandmother's Bible open in front of her, Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. She read it slowly, not like a verse, but like a mirror. That word, dominion, always made her feel both terrified and electrified, as if her bones had been waiting for someone to remind them who they were. She traced the verse with her fingertip, remembering how her grandmother used to say, you're not just Naomi. You're a carrier of something holy. At the time, she thought it was just Southern church talk, but now the verse felt encoded. She looked up, eyes catching a flash of lightning beyond the trees. The atmosphere was shifting, but not just outside. Something inside her was unlocking. Naomi got up and opened a drawer beside the stove, the one no one else ever touched. Inside was the journal, her first journal, the one she started in 2nd grade, where she drew the strange visions she never dared explain. She flipped through the pages until she found it. Page 14. A sketch of a figure, drawn in the way only a child could. Arms outstretched, light exploding from the chest, and golden strands swirling around them like DNA. The caption beneath it in shaky print. I remember the place with no walls, only light. I could fly there. Naomi touched the page and a sob caught in her throat. As something deep within her recognized it. This wasn't imagination. This was memory. She sat down slowly, the weight of it all pressing on her. Could it be, she whispered, that I'm not 100% human? In that moment, a wind stirred through the kitchen. Even though the windows were closed, the air shimmered. Gideon, her old golden retriever, lifted his head and let out a low hum, as if sensing a holy shift. Naomi looked at her reflection in the window. Not the outer shell, but the eyes. And for the first time in her life, she didn't see the girl who didn't belong. She saw fire. She saw origin. She saw the image of God. This is why I never fit in, she whispered, because I wasn't meant to. This body is just the wrapper. The real me is ancient. The world had always told her she was too emotional, too strange, too much. But now she saw the truth. She wasn't too much. She was too divine for people who only knew how to measure by flesh. She was made in the image of something eternal. Heaven had pressed its fingerprint into her very DNA, and now the code was waking up. Not everyone would understand it. Most would reject it, but it didn't matter, because Naomi no longer needed their permission to remember. Spirit first. Flesh second. Royalty always. And the moment she embraced it, the shift began. Part 2. The world tried to cage what it couldn't understand. Flashbacks to Naomi's childhood, school, church, and home. Present-day intercuts as she reflects on the wounds that shaped her. There are two kinds of cages. The ones made of steel and the ones made of stairs. Naomi had never been locked behind bars, but she had spent her entire childhood imprisoned in misunderstanding. Even now, decades later, she could still feel the echo of those stairs in the back of her soul. The ones from across the classroom. The ones that came when she asked the kind of questions that made adults twitch. Why do I feel God even when I'm alone? How come I know things before they happen? What if dreams are more real than waking up? The room would grow still. The teacher's mouth would twitch. The other kids would snicker, and someone would whisper the word that followed her like a ghost. At age 11, Naomi had a dream about a tornado. She saw the path it would take through her town, felt the pressure in her chest, even smelled the rain before it fell. The next morning she told her mum, told her teacher, told anyone who'd listen. They didn't. 3 days later the storm came. The tornado hit exactly where she said it would. No one apologized. No one asked how she knew. Instead, they whispered louder. And Naomi learned her first spiritual survival skill. Hide. Hide the visions. Hide the knowing. Hide the way her skin tingled when truth passed by. Hide the dreams that made her feel too large for this world. In church, it wasn't much better. She loved the stories of Daniel and Deborah, of Esther and Ezekiel. But what struck her most wasn't their victories, it was their loneliness. She saw it in every line, heard it in every hymn. You're never alone, but you will feel it. She asked Pastor Jonah once, "Why don't the other kids feel God like I do?" He looked at her with eyes that knew too much and said gently, "Some kids feel the rain, others were born to bring the storm." Naomi would never forget that line. Born to bring the storm. It both comforted and cursed her, because from that day on, she stopped trying to explain herself. But that didn't stop the world from reacting. At 13, during a school assembly, she stood to give a report on spiritual gifts. Her topic, the ability to feel what others hide. She said it calmly, too calmly. The room stared, and Monsieur Harlon, her teacher, folded her arms and asked with a bite in her voice, "And what exactly do you think you are, Miss Naomi? A prophet?" Naomi's face flushed, but she didn't answer, because she didn't know. Not yet. She just knew. She wasn't wrong. After that, the rejection wasn't subtle anymore. The invitations stopped. The friends vanished. The hallway whispers followed her like shadows. But here's the secret Naomi didn't even understand at the time. The world was never attacking her personality. It was attacking her presence. There was something about her energy, her light, that convicted people who had made peace with the dark. And when light walks into a room that's gotten used to shadows, the shadows always panic. Naomi became the lightning rod, not for what she did, but for what she carried. Even in her own home, she felt the tension. A mother, burdened by poverty and silence, didn't know how to handle Naomi's dreams. She once burned a journal full of her drawings. "You need to stop with this nonsense. Just be normal." But Naomi couldn't be what she wasn't, even when it cost her the safety of her mother's approval. Even when it made her sit at lunch alone, hands in her lap, pretending not to notice the way the other girls moved away from her. At night, she'd lie in bed and whisper, "God, if you made me this way, why does it hurt so much?" And in the stillness, she'd feel it. A warmth on her chest, a hush in the room, a voice not made of words. Is you were never meant to be understood. You were meant to be revealed. Now, in the present, Naomi sits in her living room, knees curled under her, watching the rain beat against the glass. She thinks about all the places she shrank herself, all the versions of herself she buried to survive. The knowing child, the vision-filled teen, the empath who felt what others hid. And she realizes she didn't bury those parts because they were wrong. She buried them because no one else had the language to honor them. The world tried to cage what it couldn't comprehend, but it never killed it, because divine identity doesn't die in darkness. It waits, it whispers, in this, popping quietly, and tonight it's burning again. Strong, like a lion stretching after too many years of silence. Naomi rises from the couch and walks to the mirror. She looks herself in the eyes, not for makeup, not for vanity, all real for remembrance. Because behind those brown eyes is a fire not born of this world, a roar that religion tried to silence, the gift that culture tried to shame, a calling that classrooms tried to belittle, a spirit that trauma tried to cage. But none of it worked. She whispers the words that once made her feel crazy, now with holy confidence. I see things before they happen. I feel what others ignore. I know things I was never taught. I don't fit, because I was never meant to. And for the first time she doesn't flinch, because the very things they mocked her for are the same things heaven anointed her with. She isn't broken. She's branded, not by shame, but by sovereignty. The world may never give her permission, but heaven already gave her assignment. Part 3. You were never of this world. A quiet prayer trail in the forest just outside Naomi's town. The wind was different here. Out, where the pines leaned like old prophets and the moss hung from branches like heaven's prayer shawl. Naomi walked slowly, feet pressing into the path she'd walked since she was a girl. The same trail where her grandmother used to bring her, before the world convinced her she needed to be smaller, quieter, less divine. The trees hadn't forgotten. They still whispered the old truths. Today she carried no Bible, no journal, just questions. Why did I always feel like I didn't belong? Screaming, why did I cry when nothing was wrong? Why did I feel things, see things, before they happened? Halfway up the trail, Naomi stopped. The air felt thick, the kind of thick that doesn't just touch your skin. It kneels on your soul. She sat on a stone near the base of the hill, closed her eyes, and breathed deep. The silence was alive, and then a presence, gentle, familiar, wait. She opened her eyes and saw her grandmother, standing at the top of the hill, but not as Naomi remembered her. No cane, no hunched back, no sorrow behind the smile. This version radiated, light shimmered around her like sunrise and memory. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't have to. The woman who had prayed over her crib now looked at her with eyes that said, I knew this day would come. And then the voice, not her grandmother's, not hers, but a third. Holy God, eternal, I am not of this world, even as I am not of this world. John 17:16. The verse rang through her like a tuning fork striking her spine. Naomi couldn't tell if she heard it in the air or in her marrow, but she knew this. Something sacred was being confirmed. Her grandmother spoke now, lips not moving, but every word landing inside Naomi's spirit. You've been trying to make a home out of a testing ground. You thought your pain was a punishment, but it was permission. The ache inside you was the language of a soul that remembered another realm. Tears slid down Naomi's cheeks, because suddenly everything made sense. Why she never felt comfortable at dinner tables filled with gossip. Why relationships fell apart when she tried to shrink. Why people told her she was too deep, too intense, too serious. She wasn't made for shallow waters. She was born from depth. Not crafted on earth, but commissioned from heaven. You're not of this world, her grandmother whispered. You were sent into it. And that word hit differently. Sent. Not born by accident. Not conceived by biology. Sent like a letter from God, addressed to a timeline that needed awakening. Like a seed of light planted into the soil of a confused generation. Her spirit had always known it. It just took her heart years to catch up. Naomi stood. The wind rose with her, and the forest seemed to breathe. A holy hush falling like a velvet curtain. She raised her arms to the sky and whispered into the trees. I don't need to fit in anymore. I was never from here. And in that surrender, something broke. Not in pain. But in release, like shackles falling from the soul. The voice returned. You are my ambassador, my light bearer, my divine daughter, and you carry the sound of home in your bones. The vision faded, the air settled. But something in Naomi didn't. She walked back down the trail. Different. Not because anything outside had changed, but because she finally remembered who she was. She didn't need validation from a world she was never designed to mirror. She was a reflection of the kingdom, a daughter of realms unseen. As she reached the edge of the woods, her phone buzzed with a message from an old friend. Hey, I don't know why, but you were on my heart. You okay? Naomi smiled. She didn't feel the urge to explain anymore. She wasn't okay. She was becoming. And now that she remembered her origin, nothing would ever feel the same again. Because the world may have raised her, but heaven sent her, and she was going back to the sender, not in death, but in mission. Part 4. The Divine Code Awakens. It started as a tremor, not in her hands, but in her knowing. A phrase repeated in her spirit like a sacred drumbeat. You're not who they said you were. You're who I sent you to become." For years, she thought the dreams were just imagination, the strange coincidences, the way sermons felt like personal letters, the times she opened the Bible and the exact verse her spirit needed was waiting, glowing like fire on the page. It was never random. It was the code awakening. Everything began to connect. The rejection, the loneliness, the questions no one else asked, the burden that felt too heavy for someone her size but somehow never crushed her. All of it had been part of the script, written in heaven, concealed in time. Because divine DNA doesn't shout, it waits until the right season, until the right hour, until the right yes. And now her yes had come. Something inside her began to speak with authority. Not a voice she'd heard before, but one that felt native. You are light. You are not becoming worthy. You were born worthy. You were never behind. You were being built. Every prayer she ever whispered into her pillow, every tear that fell with no audience, every moment she thought she was forgotten, they all came rushing back, not as regret, but as proof. Proof she had always been seen, always marked, always known. What others called too emotional was actually prophetic sensitivity. What they called overthinking was divine intuition. What they mocked as weirdness was holiness in disguise. The divine code inside her wasn't just information, it was transformation. She could feel it now, realigning her steps, changing how she heard, how she saw, how she spoke. Her words started to carry weight. She wasn't speaking from theory. She was speaking from assignment, not to impress, but to unlock. When people came near, they felt it. Some drew close, hungry for light. Others recoiled, afraid of what she mirrored back. But she no longer needed their comfort. She had clarity. She finally knew what the dreams meant, why the pain had come early, why the silence had lasted long. Because when God awakens the code in you, He silences the world around you. So you won't confuse applause with approval. She wasn't here to fit systems. She was here to disrupt them, lovingly, boldly, divinely. And now the code was alive, not dormant, not hidden, not silent, awake and ready. Part 5. You are the lion the city tried to cage. They called her too loud, then accused her of being too quiet, too intense, then too soft, too different to belong, yet somehow too similar to ignore. But it was never about her volume. It was about her vibration. The truth? They were never uncomfortable with her personality. They were disturbed by her power. Because lions don't roar to be heard. They roar because they remember who they are. And Naomi was remembering. The city tried to cage her, not with bars, but with boxes. Expectations, shame, roles, label. Be the helper, be the peacemaker, be the quiet one, be smaller, be safe, be forgettable. But deep down, something sacred growled every time she tried to comply. That growl was the sound of heaven pushing back against the limits earth tried to place on her. She remembered the times they looked her in the eye and said, "You're not like the rest of us." They thought it was a curse, but now she saw it. That sentence was a prophecy in disguise, because chosen ones were never called to mirror the room. They were sent to shift it. She didn't need a spotlight. She didn't chase platforms. But wherever she stood, the atmosphere noticed. Not because she tried to take up space, but because God had filled her with something too large to shrink. Her silence preached. Her walk disrupted systems. Her presence exposed comfort zones. People mistook her peace for weakness, but it was restrained. The lion doesn't roar at every mouse. And now, the restraint was lifting. They'd tried to keep her tame, make her trade her fire for favor, her anointing for approval, her originality for acceptance. But heaven never meant for her to blend in. She was set apart, not for fame, but for freedom, and not just her own. Because lions don't just break cages. They lead the other captives out too. The moment she stopped apologizing for her power, things shifted. Some doors slammed shut. Some friends faded. Some places grew cold. The ones who were truly sent by God, they began to find her, drawn not to what she had, but to what she carried. Not of noise, but of remembrance, a frequency that only the called could hear. And now she knew. The city didn't reject her because she was wrong. The city feared her because she was right. She was the lion, and she was never meant to be caged. Because when chosen ones remember who they are, they don't just break free. They become the sound of freedom itself. You were sent, and now you're seen. There was no trumpet, no spotlight, no announcement when it happened, just a quiet certainty rising in her chest. Naomi had stepped into who she was always meant to be. No more shrinking, no more silencing her spirit to make others comfortable, no more pretending she didn't carry the roar of the divine inside her ribcage. Because now she remembered, she wasn't born to blend in. She was sent to stand apart. The rejection, confirmation, the isolation, preparation, the restlessness. All those years she thought she was waiting on God to move. But heaven was waiting on her to agree with what it already knew. You are not of this world. You are not 100% human. You are a spirit wrapped in flesh, a divine assignment walking through time. And now, the world would know it too. Not through fame, not through noise, but through presence. A stillness that shifts rooms. A voice that doesn't need volume to carry fire. A life that no longer apologizes for its holiness. Naomi looked in the mirror one last time, but this time she didn't see a survivor. She saw a sent one, an ambassador of heaven, a daughter of realms unseen. She smiled, not the kind that seeks approval, but the kind that remembers origin. Because chosen ones don't wait for the world to recognize them. They walk in authority and let the world catch up. You were never meant to blend in, because you were born to awaken others. You carry heaven's fingerprint. No earthly system can erase it. When you finally believe who God says you are, everything changes. If this story awakens something deep in your spirit, comment below. I know who I am, and if you believe this message was heaven's confirmation for someone else, share it. Let the other lions hear the roar. You weren't crazy. You were chosen, and the world is about to see it.